Baudelaire and the Poetics of Evil. Baudelaire was one of the most important critics of the 19th century. His views, some original, some adapted from earlier authors, radically changed the course of European literature. He wrote extensively on literature and the visual arts. Although posterity views him as a poet, his contemporaries knew him mostly for his prose and translations, except, of course, for the scandal of the Flowers of Evil's obscenity trial. Baudelaire is not a systematic theorist. Even his best work is often digressive, disorganized, and repetitious. Yet his writing carries authority. His forceful prose style conveys the originality and perspicacity of his insights. "Always be a poet," he wrote, even in prose. Although Baudelaire prized pure intellect in the creative process, he did not see criticism as a cool, analytical enterprise. He admired, quote, "the religious intoxication of great critics," end quote. Such spiritual inebriation informs his best essays, which pulse with emotional energy. Baudelaire explored poetics from the perspective of a practicing poet. He searched for clarity on the issues that obsessed him as an artist. As he explored his own creative dilemma, he articulated ideas that proved decisive to posterity. The central idea of Baudelaire's Poetics is the autonomy of art. He insisted that literature, and indeed all art, had no specific moral purpose. He understood that his theory contradicted the popular opinion that literature should have an ethical, religious, or political aim. "Most people assume," he observed, "that the object of poetry is some kind of teaching, that it must now fortify conscience, now perfect manners, now, in sum, demonstrate something useful." The didactic impulse, Baudelaire declared, was an aesthetic heresy. Poetry, he insisted, has no object but itself. His conviction influenced the kinds of poetry he wrote. For him, poetry was a lyric medium. As Paul Valéry observed, "The Flowers of Evil is an unusual book. It contains no historical poems, narratives, philosophical poems, or political opinions, a radical break from the norms of its era. Instead, it presented, quote, charm, music, powerful abstract sensuality," end quote. Baudelaire's theory of the autonomy of art is more nuanced than posterity's simple "arts for art's sake" slogan. Although he believed that true art had no moral aims, he recognized that individual works of art might nonetheless have moral consequences. In his notes for an abandoned preface to the second edition of The Flowers of Evil, he struggled to respond to his criminal indictment for obscenity and blasphemy. Although the public scandal had wounded him, he professed indifference. Quote, "Some have told me that these poems might do harm. I have not rejoiced at that. Others, good souls, that they might do good. But that has given me no regret." Baudelaire doesn't dispute the moral impact of his work. He simply declares it doesn't matter. The positive or negative moral consequences of a poem are immaterial to its artistic value. As Oscar Wilde wrote 30 years later in the preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray, quote, "There is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written," end quote. That view remains as controversial today as it was during the legal prosecutions of both authors. Neither Baudelaire nor Wilde won society's support or forgiveness for their aesthetic. Artists find some ideas more useful than others. Baudelaire's belief in the autonomy of art and his rejection of didacticism spoke powerfully to the best poets of the next generation, who wanted to escape the traditional burden of addressing moral and political ideology, including the nationalism that obsessed the Romantic era. Artistic autonomy became an animating principle of the symbolist movement, as well as the decadent, aesthetic, and early modernist movements. Although Baudelaire's earliest followers were French, first Paul Verlaine, Arthur Rimbaud, and Stéphane Mallarmé, then Paul Valéry, Jules Laforgue, and Paul Claudel, his impact was international. Symbolism influenced a diverse cohort of poets, including W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, Wallace Stevens, Hart Crane, Stefan Gheorghe, Rainer Maria Rilke, Gabriele D'Annunzio, Eugenio Montale, Alexander Bloch, Osip Mandelstam, Emile Verhaeren, Federico Garcia Lorca, and Antonio Machado. If the purpose of poetry is neither moral nor didactic, does art have any goal beside the excitation of the senses, the emotions, and the imagination? However memorable as a phrase, art for art's sake is a circular assertion. Is there anything at stake other than the self-contained microcosm of sensation? At the center of Baudelaire's Poetics is an emphatic response to this question. He recognized that narrow aestheticism encourages art that is merely decorative, mood painting in verse. It devolves into evanescent notions such as poésie pure, pure poetry, made of lovely sounds and evocative images, unattached to any exterior reality. Such aestheticism fosters a deliberately minor poetry. One might fault Baudelaire for many things, but never for minor aspirations. For Baudelaire, the goal of poetry is beauty. But beauty is not an end in itself. Through beauty, poetry brings the reader into a new relationship with reality. The experience of beauty changes consciousness. It allows one to perceive qualities and correspondences of things not apprehensible in quotidian existence. There is an almost mystical sense of transcendent consciousness in Baudelaire's notion of beauty. Art is so ecstatic that it momentarily annihilates the self, freeing human awareness from its ennui and egotism. Quote, "In certain almost supernatural states of the soul," he wrote, "the profundity of life reveals itself completely in any spectacle, however ordinary it may be, upon which one gazes. It becomes its symbol." End quote. The ecstasy of beauty in Baudelaire's Poetics creates a consciousness that apprehends the hidden correspondences between the physical and spiritual realms of existence. Scholars debate whether Baudelaire's theory of beauty was meant to be understood in literal or figurative terms. Perhaps here, as so often in his work, Baudelaire endorsed two contradictory ideas at once. He could never replace God in his worldview. Why else did he need to revolt against divine order rather than merely ignore it? He believed in a numinous, supernatural level of reality toward which art aspired. This conviction gave the revelations of beauty an objective quality. One actually participates in something real, even if the experience is difficult to articulate in conceptual terms. To borrow the philosopher Jacques Maritain's haunting phrase, beauty represents, quote, the splendor of the secrets of being radiating into intelligence, end quote. From this perspective, beauty has a redemptive power. It allows fallen humanity to participate briefly in mysterious grace. Now, if Baudelaire's theory is understood on a figurative level, however, then beauty offers only the forms of meaning which the individual fills with subjective significance. This interpretation, which has found favor with Freudians, postmodernists, and deconstructionists, uses ideas the poet himself explored. Baudelaire understood the allure of altered states of consciousness from stimulants and narcotics. He analyzed the ways in which those substances change private perceptions of reality. Art offers a similar, though more edifying, escape from the burdens of existence. Art illuminates the imagination, memory, and sensory perception. In this figurative interpretation, however, art does not transcend human consciousness by connecting it to a higher or ideal realm of existence. Now comes the revolutionary twist in Baudelaire's Poetics that gave his work a transfigurative impact on its early readers. If beauty is a heightened form of perception that reveals the occult correspondences of reality, then such intense consciousness can also transform the perception of objects considered ugly or evil. Discovering the beauty in such objects, disease, vice, intoxication, decay, reveals the secret purposes of their troubling existence. If art is to redeem human existence from purposelessness and ennui, then it must develop the capacity to accommodate the sordid and evil aspects of modern life. Art must develop, therefore, a poetics of evil. Surely the darker aspects of Baudelaire's Poetics originated in his own character. His melancholic temperament had always colored his sense of the beautiful. Witness his passionate early attachment to Edgar Allan Poe. I can scarcely conceive, he wrote in his journal, a type of beauty that has nothing to do with sorrow. Baudelaire, however, developed his personal perspective into a general theory. Le beau est toujours bizarre, he declared. The beautiful is always bizarre. His poetic project became to find the beauty in evil and repellent things. That ambition required the creation of a sensibility so capacious it could encompass both the grotesque and the sublime. A Poetics of Evil also demanded a style that could present his bleak material and yet give pleasure. In repugnant objects, he wrote, we find charm. In his notes for an unfinished preface to The Flowers of Evil, he boasts of his achievement, quote, I have found it amusing, and the more pleasant, because the task was more difficult to extract beauty from evil, end quote. Baudelaire's celebration of the beauty of evil marked a revolutionary moment in European aesthetics. He overturned conventional notions of beauty and offered for admirations objets repugnants, repugnant objects in both sensory and moral terms. The repercussions of this idea continue to echo through art and literature. The contemporary notion of transgressive art traces its lineage back to the flowers of evil. Before Baudelaire, poets had presented grotesque, ugly, and evil things in their work, but these objects had not been deliberately connected to the beautiful or sublime, nor had poets declared these objects beyond moral judgment. The aestheticization of evil became central to Baudelaire's literary legacy, with enduring impact on fiction and drama, as well as poetry. Baudelaire's Poetics of Evil, however, possesses its own ambiguity. As an isolated idea, it appears quite simple, but how should it be interpreted in the larger context of his poetics? The integration poses a series of fundamental questions. Is the aestheticization of evil an end in itself, or must it be connected to a broader frame of values? Is the discovery of beauty in evil transgressive or redemptive? Does Baudelaire's aesthetic revolution destroy the traditional notions of beauty, including its inherent relationship with the true and the good? Or does Baudelaire instead only broaden the aperture of beauty to reconcile all that exists to an ideal order? The purpose of beauty in Baudelaire's worldview is to provide a glimpse of ideal order. He affirmed Poe's rapturous description of humanity's wild effort to reach beauty and, quote, ecstatic prescience of the glories beyond the grave, to attain a portion of that loveliness whose very elements, perhaps, appertain to eternity alone, end quote. Baudelaire, however, specifies that evil and sickness are also beautiful. The contradiction seems irreconcilable until one remembers the poet's obsession with original sin and the fallen nature of humanity. Baudelaire saw an essential duplicity in human nature, with its, quote, simultaneous allegiances, end quote, to both God and Satan. His poetics sought to reconcile their contradictory claims. In this synthesis, his vision represents a secularization of the Christian notion that everything exists, including evil, to serve a divine purpose. Baudelaire relocates the theological concept from God to humanity. Since his poetics is human, it must reflect the duality of fallen humanity, half spirit and half animal. The individual exists in perpetual tension between two antithetical forces. Quote, invocation of God or spirituality is a desire to climb higher, end quote, he wrote in his journals. Quote, that of Satan or animality is delight in descent, end quote. Baudelaire did not conceive of one force without the other. Neither was sufficient by itself to encompass reality. For Baudelaire, beauty exists in an endless dialectic between the spiritual and animalistic elements of human nature. The energy of that dialectic animates Baudelaire's work. It also explains why his poetry is difficult to interpret. It does not present static insights, but a dynamic relationship between contradictory forces. He believes that art needs to embody and express both the divine and demonic sides of human nature without separating them. The profound ambition and originality of Baudelaire's poetic vision suggests why The Flowers of Evil has exercised such powerful fascination over posterity. In its design and execution, the book embodies the author's transformative aesthetic. Individually, his poems are remarkable lyric works, animated by the author's musical genius and emotional candor. Dozens of the poems live as independent works in anthologies and textbooks. Read together in Baudelaire's carefully arranged collection, however, they present the complexity and contradictions of the human condition. They tremble with the pleasures, sorrows, and angers of his foreshortened life. Baudelaire did not seek to go beyond good and evil. He strove to see both clearly as part of the dialectic of reality. He understood the power of ambiguity to express the double nature of the human soul. In the final lines of Le Voyage, The Voyage, the last poem in the Flowers of Evil, Baudelaire brings the book to its visionary conclusion. Even on the final journey toward death, the poet rejoices in the ecstatic prescience of being fully alive, open to the mysterious beauty of mortal existence. To plunge to the depths of the abyss, hell or heaven, who cares? Into the depths of the unknown to discover the new.